The polar regions of the world are filled with unimaginable horrors. Today I'm going to introduce you to the terrifying spiders of the Arctic, the restless phantoms of Antarctica, and other creepy things from the ice. Spiders of the Arctic. If you've ever wondered why there always seems to be a spider within arm's reach, it's likely because there are over 50,000 spider species around the world. Arachnids are practically inescapable. Even in the icy reaches of the Arctic, there are terrifying spiders to haunt your dreams. So, how many spiders do you think are in the Arctic? I'll give you a hint. It's over 100. There are over 100 different species of spider in the lands of the Arctic, in places like Iceland, Sweden, Alaska, Russia, and Canada. Most of these icy spiders are totally harmless. The Arctic is home to the common house spider, one of the most abundant spiders in the world. They live in human dwellings, spinning silk webs in the dusty corners of your home. But these arachnids are very beneficial. Common house spiders get rid of cockroaches, moths, and buzzing flies. But there are even stranger spiders living in the Arctic, like the ground crab spider. They live in leaves and under logs, ambushing anything that gets close enough to eat. They aren't dangerous to humans though, so the people of the Arctic don't need to worry. There are also barn funnel weaver spiders and furrow orb weaver spiders, and the creepiest one by far would have to be the common stretch spider. These are long-jawed orb weavers that have extremely long legs. They're like little spider gymnasts, and they're extremely creepy to look at, even if they're less than half an inch long. The scariest spider that lives on the ice is the Arctic wolf spider. This arachnid is native to the Arctic and is closely related to wolf spiders you find throughout North America. It's one of the most feared spiders in the world for its size. Their bodies can grow nearly 2 inches, making them frightening to behold. They aren't particularly deadly, but they do sneak into people's houses and have a tendency to bite humans. A wolf spider bite isn't fatal, but it's not exactly pleasant either. I wanted to give a big thank you to Anthony Keenan and Wanda Maxim for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries, or dinosaurs, or creepy things found in the ice. The Cold Case. For 2 decades, a man was buried underneath an Austrian glacier. He went missing in 2001 and was only discovered in August 2023. The police were able to identify him by pulling his driver's license out of his frozen backpack. In the last couple of years, Austria's glaciers have been steadily melting, and scientists have called the sheer amount of lost ice unprecedented. This is especially true on the Schlatenkis Glacier, where the mysterious body was found. The glacier is located within the Hohotauern National Park, which isn't too far from the Italian border. A mountain climbing guide, someone who's not been named, discovered the icy corpse over 9,000 feet above sea level. It was a disturbing scene to come across during what should have been a peaceful mountain hike. The ice wasn't completely melted, so there were still some frozen patches. There was the body itself, strewn in a hideous position amidst the snow. Then, a few feet below the body was a frozen backpack. Within the backpack, rescue operators discovered a bank card, a driver's license, and a bit of cash. There was also ski touring equipment scattered around the area. It looked as if the man had been soloing the mountain when he got into an accident. That was back in 2001, meaning the dead man was encased in ice for 22 years. He was taken away by helicopter, then his DNA was sent to a laboratory to officially confirm his identity. And while local police said it's rare for human remains to be found on the glacier, it's already happened twice in 2023. Just weeks before this body was found in August, a group of alpinists found several other sets of human remains on the same glacier in June. A lost civilization? How creepy would it be if one day we all found out that the conspiracy theorists were right and that there really is a frozen civilization buried beneath Antarctica? I guess the level of creepiness would depend on the civilization. What kind of people might have lived in Antarctica thousands of years ago when there was no ice on the continent? It's a fascinating question, but it's one that can't reliably be answered. But according to one scientific theory, the conspiracy theorists might be right. Antarctica may have been free of ice and home to a mysterious society. The idea is that Antarctica had no ice on it 12,000 years ago. And that's when a group of highly advanced people arrived on the continent and began building shelters. These people thrived, growing into a mighty civilization. But then the Earth's crust shifted, sending Antarctica to the South Pole like a ship adrift in the sea. And over the years, Antarctica gradually froze. The poor people who lived on the continent were helpless as their cities slowly became icicles. There's very little proof of it though. Mostly it's fringe scientists who support the theory of a buried civilization. Archaeologist Jonathan Gray made the outrageous claim that the US government is covering up a massive dig that's 2 miles beneath the ice. And Gray believes that they're digging into the foundations of the frozen civilization. So Much Ivory. In the rapidly thawing permafrost of Siberia, archaeologists have been busy excavating some amazing but unusual artifacts. These artifacts were recently exhibited at the British Museum, and most of them are over 28,000 years old. The exhibition was the biggest of its kind, a truly shocking display of ivory artifacts. Many of the objects were lent to the British Museum by scientists from the Russian Academy of Science. The objects included sewing needles made from walrus ivory and decorative objects crafted from mammoth ivory. The most fascinating objects were excavated from the Yana rhinoceros horn archaeological site in Siberia. This place is 300 miles deep into the Arctic Circle. Here, Paleolithic humans hunted Ice Age beasts 30,000 years ago, and it's believed that they also developed the very first Arctic art style. Amber Lincoln, who was involved in the exhibition, said the ivory needles were extremely important. Ice Age people used the needles to sew themselves warm clothing from the behemoths they slayed. One of the artifacts pulled from the ice was a traditional Greenlandic sled that was made from narwhal bone. It was procured by British explorer Sir John Ross during his 1818 expedition to the Arctic Circle. It was the first time Europeans met the Inuit people of Greenland. The Mount Arabus disaster. Antarctica is cold, desolate, and largely devoid of life. Yet it's also said to be extremely haunted. So how could a place like Antarctica with such little human history be plagued by ghosts? It all has to do with a tragic disaster that happened less than 50 years ago. It was the most horrendous catastrophe that ever happened on the icy continent. In 1977, Air New Zealand began operating scenic flights over Antarctica. These proved to be a great success with the booming middle class. You could board a flight in New Zealand, fly 11 hours across Antarctica, and be back home in time for supper. It was a first-class luxury during the golden age of travel. There still wasn't much legroom, but it was a whole different experience in the 1970s compared to your typical flight today. But things changed in 1979. On November 28th, the worst peacetime disaster in New Zealand's history unfolded. Flight TE901 was carrying 257 people from New Zealand to Antarctica, and the pilot behind the controls was Captain Jim Collins. He was navigating through the clouds, but wanted to bring the plane down to give the prestigious guests a better view of the icy mountains. So he began lowering the plane to about 2,000 feet. He assumed he was on the right flight path, but he wasn't. The plane dipped out of the clouds and smashed right into a mountain. Unfortunately, there was no time for the pilot to pull up or change course. Captain Collins wasn't where he thought he was. He brought the plane down and smacked into the side of Mount Arabus, a sleeping volcano. In the minutes and hours that followed the crash, the flight controllers back in New Zealand knew something was wrong. They assumed that the plane had run out of fuel and had to make an emergency landing. Whatever was going on, it was clear that the plane was no longer in the sky. Search and rescue operators soon arrived in Antarctica to find a horrific nightmare. The wreckage was scattered across Ross Island, and there were chunks of airplane on the lowest slopes of Mount Arabus. Sadly, it was clear from the first moment that nobody had survived the crash. 227 passengers and 30 crew members were killed. Most of their bodies had to be transported out of the snow and ice by recovery operators. But there were 40 people who were never identified and 28 corpses that were never found. So sadly, they remain frozen in Antarctica, and many believe their spirits still haunt the pale, windy landscape. As for how this could have possibly happened, the initial investigations found the pilot to be at fault. They concluded that Collins flew below the minimum safe altitude. Had he stuck to the guidelines, they never would have been low enough to hit the side of the volcano. But it came out later that the airline was really to blame because they'd made a mistake in the flight path, which resulted in Captain Jim Collins descending in front of the huge mountain. Antarctopelta. One of the very first dinosaurs that was found in Antarctica was the Antarctopelta. It's a small, creepy dinosaur that lived between 99 and 94 million years ago. It's the only ankylosaur that's ever been found on the frigid continent. Only a few fragments have been discovered, so most of what scientists know about the creature is based on guesswork. Like other ankylosaurs, it likely had a club tail and spikes on its back. It would have been completely covered in armor to protect itself from ferocious predators. And while it wasn't necessarily a giant, it was still a big animal. It was anywhere between 13 and 20 feet long with an estimated weight of 770 pounds. Because it ambled around on 4 legs, it wasn't taller than a person, but it was certainly thicker. Finding dinosaurs in Antarctica is extremely difficult when compared to other parts of the world. The incomplete skeleton of this animal was initially discovered by a group of Argentinian geologists in 1986, but it took them 10 years to complete excavations because of the harsh conditions. This discovery has allowed scientists to agree that underneath the Antarctic ice is an untouched treasure trove of dinosaur remains. What other crazy creatures do you think lived in Antarctica before it was covered in ice? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. The penguin murdering iceberg. In 2023, just as summer was winding to an end, a massive iceberg tried to kill some penguins, and it almost caused an ecological disaster. The iceberg was about half the size of Rhode Island, about 45 miles long. It had been created as a result of an icy collision with other icebergs, causing it to go rogue through Antarctic waters. It drifted slowly along the coast of Antarctica until suddenly shifting course and taking a direct route toward Clarence Island. Clarence Island happens to be one of the most important breeding sites for chinstrap penguins anywhere in the world. There are over 100,000 breeding pairs on the island every winter. The penguins lay their eggs and then incubate them. It's a very important place, which almost got obliterated by the rampaging iceberg. Luckily for the penguins, though, the collision happened in September, just before they returned to the island for breeding season. Heather Lynch from Stony Brook University in New York said if the collision happened just a few months later, the penguins might have been obliterated. It was like the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, only it would have been an iceberg that massacred tens of thousands of innocent penguin babies. No penguins were actually hurt, but it was definitely a close call. Pseudoscorpions. Pseudoscorpions are creepy creatures that look like they belong in a tropical jungle or skittering across a sand dune in the Egyptian desert. These things have 8 legs and pincers just like a crab. They live in the high Arctic of Canada and look shockingly like normal scorpions, only they aren't. Pseudoscorpions are ice-dwelling critters that are closely related to scorpions, spiders, and ticks, but they're biologically different. Chris Buddle from McGill University said that they most closely resemble an ordinary scorpion but without a tail. These tiny monsters almost look like cockroach-scorpion hybrids. They have huge pincers that they use to battle prey, with their prey being small fly larvae and minuscule springtails. They're even venomous. Their claws have special glands that allow them to inject poison into their tiny victims. There are 30 different species throughout Canada, and many of them dwell in the Arctic. Humans have nothing to worry about, though. These tiny pseudoscorpions are barely big enough to cover your thumbnail. The only real danger they pose is to itty-bitty bugs. They were first discovered in the Yukon Territory about 30 years ago. Researchers thought they were an entirely new species, but as scientists know today, there are about 3,000 different species of pseudoscorpions across the globe. Many live in the Arctic regions of Siberia and Canada, but pseudoscorpions can also be found in tropical areas as well. The 1968 crash. In the Swiss Alps, 2 sets of human remains were discovered in the summer of 2022. They were found near the wreckage of a plane that crashed in 1968. Both the human bodies and the plane wreckage had been frozen underneath a thick layer of snow and ice. The bodies and plane aren't related to one another. The discovery of the corpses was made by a group of French mountain climbers maneuvering across the Chesjian Glacier in Switzerland. The plane debris was found on the Aletsch Glacier by a mountain guide. The airplane was identified as a Piper Cherokee plane that crashed on June 30th, 1968. It was carrying a teacher, a medical officer, and the medical officer's young son. Their bodies were recovered 54 years ago, but it was impossible to get the wreckage off the glacier in 1968, so it remained buried until now. As for the two unrelated bodies, that's a mystery the authorities haven't solved yet. They're still working to figure out who the bodies belonged to and how long they were frozen in the Alps. How do you feel now that you know the Arctic is filled with bugs and the Alps are littered with bodies? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.